Welcome to the March 22nd meeting of the Murfreesboro City Council. Councilmember Kurt Wade has our prayer. And then, Kurt, when you get done with the prayer, I'm going to introduce a group that's here to give our Pledge of Allegiance.
All right. Let's pray. Lord, we just thank you for this day. We just thank you for the leadership of this city. Most of all, we ask you to bless our country, bless our nation, bless our school systems. Lord, we just ask you to be the God that you are, and thank you for what you're doing. In Jesus Christ's name, amen.
Amen. Tonight I want to introduce, we have a PAC 1615. They're from Walter Hill, a group of Cub Scouts. We have, when I call your name, if y'all would come up to the podium, they're going to do our pledge tonight. We have Jamie Ballou, Nick Bradford, Noah Bradford, Emmett Barnes, Hunter Higgs, Mark Thompson, Maddox Graham Mason Landers, and Brendan Graham Mason Landers. Gentlemen, I had the opportunity to be able to speak and spend some time with these guys before the meeting, so I feel safe to tell y'all that there's the next mayor or even president is in this group. I feel it. So, all right, gentlemen, if y'all will, if you'll stand, we're going to do our Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank y'all very much. Thank y'all for coming. Thank you. Before we get into ceremonial items, I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm wearing my MTSU tie tonight. So we had a group of men who had a phenomenal season. That season ended on Sunday night in Louisville, Kentucky. And with that, a 16-year career for Coach Kermit Davis here in the city of Murfreesboro. And, you know, Kermit and Betty and Allie and Claire have been such a big part of this community for so long, and I think it's easy in sports now that we could be upset for someone leaving, but I think it's safe to say Kermit and his family going to Ole Miss, it could not happen to a better family. So I want to say publicly on behalf of the city of Murfreesboro, we want to thank the Davis family for what they've done at MTSU, for the excitement over the last 16 years, especially over the last 4 or 5 years going to Michigan State, to Minnesota, to all the different wins that we've had, and more importantly, the way that they represent this community. The young men on the basketball team, you never hear an issue with anyone getting in trouble. They're always at the different community events, and so I know that will continue with whoever the next coach is, but until then, we're thankful for Kermit and the Davis family and what they've done for MTSU. All right, with that, we'll ask Greg Tucker. He's our county historian, and Greg has got the podium tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. I thought I'd talk tonight a little bit about place names. Place names, particularly in a county that has things like Boring School and Monkey Woman Bridge. I get a lot of questions about the origin of place names. But there's one name that keeps coming up over and over.
Is it Bridgie McBridgeface?
Yeah. A name that we associate with our neighborhood, Mink Slide. And the questions usually come in 3 parts. One is, what's the origin of the name? Why is there a community called Mink Slide, or was? Exactly where was Mink Slide? And third, what's the significance of that particular name, and why is it used?
Is there a reason you waited for the Boy Scouts to leave?
It did come to mind. The curiosity about that name has gone on for many, many years. In fact, close to 100 years that I've traced it back. In 1932, I guess you'd say front page gossip columnist for the Daily News Journal posed the question for the readers and said, what's with this name Mink Slide, and invited readers to contribute an explanation of the name. A number came in. One of them was that down on Vine Street back in the 20s and 30s, there was an establishment, and the basement was a 24-hour gaming operation, gambling. And the only way to access that operation was to use the old cold chute slide. And if you were going to come down the slide anticipating you were going to get in the game, you had to bring something of value with which to wager, which at the time may have been furs or hides or mink. A second one, a little more plausible, was that Town Creek just used to be full of these little black, expensive hide animals. Since Town Creek, for the previous 100 years, had been the sewer and the waste disposal for the town, it's unlikely that was the case. One of my favorite explanations was that there was a gentleman who, because of the way he wore his hair, slick back, black, shiny, was called Mink or Minky. And one cold January day, he slipped and fell and slid on his backside all the way down to the bottom of the hill, hence Mink's Slide. If that were true, I wish I could have interviewed the fellow. My good friend C.B. Arnett, the late C.B. Arnett, in his book, Mink Slide to Main Street, offered an explanation, again based upon the 1920s, 1930s. And he measured the gradient and the slope from Holden Hardware down to Vine Street, found it dropped about 12 feet, mentioned that, and then said there was a hides fur dealer at the bottom of the slope, and that's why they called it Mink Slide. I spent a lot of time with CB in the last decade before he died. And I was visiting with him at his house one time, and we were talking about various things around the community. And I said, CB, where did you get this explanation of the name Mink Slide? And he said in all candor, well, Greg, I just made it up. but it's logical. Well, it's logical only because he hadn't traced back the origin and the time use of the name, because we know in 1873, John Spence, in his Annals of Rutherford County, made a reference to the Mink Slide neighborhood in those terms and described it as the Black Business District and named all the businesses that were in the district back in the 1870s when he was writing, none of which was a fur trader. To understand the history of the name, we really have to start with one important point, and that is that the name and the usage of the name is not unique to Murfreesboro or Rutherford County. In fact, there's a Mink Slide neighborhood in Atlanta. There's a Mink Slide neighborhood in Tuscaloosa. And note the term Mink Slide has been used in towns and cities across the Southeast since Reconstruction to identify the local black business district, and over time became synonymous with another common phrase, the red light district. Now, in Tennessee, if you go on Google and put Mink Slide, Tennessee, you won't come up with Murfreesboro, because the most prominent, best-known Mink Slide in Tennessee is in Columbia, Tennessee. Columbia, Tennessee, because of, well, many historians describe it as the first racial confrontation in the post-World War II area. It's called the Mink Slide Riots. Occurred in February 1946 in Columbia, Tennessee. Columbia, Tennessee has a neighborhood that is identified as Mink Slide. That is particularly interesting because not only was it the first confrontation of that nature, it also is very closely related to the name Thurgood Marshall. In fact, the Mink Slide riots in Columbia, Tennessee started the national prominence of a very talented young lawyer named Thurgood Marshall. Curiously, there is a link or a connection between the Mink Slide riots and Murfreesboro, but I'm going to save that for next month, so we have something next month. If you read some of the writings about Murfreesboro in the Victorian era, 1890 to 1910, you'll find that Murfreesboro, there are frequent references to, quote, Mink Slide in the context of, quote, pleasure. For example, Gerald Clark, describing Murfreesboro's high society in the 1890s, wrote, and I'm quoting exactly, "Everyone knew who was up, who was down, and whose husband was sneaking off for some illicit pleasure in Mink Slide, the red light district." Also of note, the city ordinances in 1900 regulated but did not prohibit the world's oldest profession if it was confined to the proper neighborhood. Well, where is that neighborhood? Different people might give you a different definition of it, but we're fortunate that we have a United States government decision and determination as to where Mink Slide is in Murfreesboro. During maneuvers in Rutherford County prior to World War II's Normandy invasion, the U.S. Army Command here determined that Mink Slide was bounded on the east by South Church, to the west by South Walnut, on the south by State Street, and on the north by the south side of the square. South Maple Street runs right through the middle of the old Mink Slide neighborhood. And as defined by the Army, the area was then declared off limits for reasons of health and safety. Reading the description reminds me that I'm standing, or you're sitting, directly in the middle of the old Mink Slide neighborhood. In fact, I would say this is the Mink Slide area, according to that definition. Now, I am not going to yield to the temptation to make a comparison between the City Hall activity and the Mink Slide activity. I don't think I need to. But the only red lights today, I guess, are traffic signals. So why is the term Mink Slide used so commonly or widely to identify certain neighborhoods known for a particular activity? That's the tough one. Is there current usage that might be informative or reflective on this point? Yes. Alicia Moore helps us on this point. All of you that watched the Super Bowl this year saw Alicia Moore. Her stage name is Pink. Do a very credible job, I thought, on the national anthem. Generally, she's identified, at least in my exposure, as a rap artist. Not only a performer, but a composer. And one of her compositions that she's recorded was titled, "Oh My God." Now, it's not a church hymn or spiritual. It's "Oh My God" used in the sense that we see these days, OMG, kind of as a spontaneous expression, surprise or amazement. Oh my God. And the explicit lyrics describe intimate contact and use the phrase Mink Slide. I'm not going to try to sing it for you. I don't think I can get the rhythm right. But if you go online for Pink and Mink Slide or Oh My God, you'll find the detailed lyrics. In fact, I suspect maybe tomorrow her manager will wonder why their webpage gets so many hits from this town in Tennessee. But it'll be there. Is there a lesson we can draw from this? Well, I might suggest some local history presentations are more interesting than others.
Okay, guys, back in the back, you can get off the mute button or the dump out button right now. Thank you, Mr. Tucker. All right, we'll move to our consent agenda. Item B-A, we need to remove from our list tonight, please. Are there any questions or items that need to be removed from the consent agenda?
If there are no questions or comments, I move for approval of the consent agenda as presented with the exception of B-A, which has been removed.
So moved.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright will call the roll.
Vice Mayor Scales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. right, you have the minutes from the March 8, 2018 regular meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll move to second readings. Consider for passage on second and final reading ordinance 18013, amending the 2017-2018 budget, which is the third amendment.
Oh, Mayor, that's me. We send these periodically. This is just another one of those amendments that we must put in place so that we can get a purchase order done and move business along. It's just more housekeeping than anything.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion and second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll move to new business. And pursuant to Resolution 18RPH10, adopted by the City Council on February 15, 2018, we'll conduct a public hearing to consider a proposed amendment to approximately 28.1 acres in the Planned Residential Development District located along Veterans Parkway and St. Andrews Drive. Kimbrough Woods Development Group, LLC, applicant 2017-423. Notice this public hearing was published in the March 6, 2018 issue of the local newspaper. Mr. Blomley.
Good evening, Mayor McFarland and members of council. Our first public hearing tonight is a pretty simple amendment to the Kimbrough Woods PRD. You'll recall that back in 2017, you reviewed and approved an amendment to the PRD that would expand the overall development, expand the PRD zone. At that time, the applicant put in the PRD pattern book that the minimum lot width would be 60 feet. That was, according to the applicant's design team, a typo. The minimum lot width should have read 55 feet, and in the letter they have indicated that this is the only change that they are proposing is to change the minimum lot width from 60 feet to the intended 55-foot lot width. All other aspects of the PRD stay the same. The density remains the same. The layout that they proposed remains the same. Nothing changes except the minimum lot width changes to what they intended it to be. They identified this error when they were preparing their construction plans for Section 1. As I mentioned, everything else with respect to the PRD will remain the same, and this will result in no increase in units over what was approved by the council in 2017. I'll be happy to answer any questions with regards to this amendment. I've included the 2017 pattern book in your agenda materials just for reference purposes. Mr. Clyde Roundtree with Huddleston Steel is here if you have any questions for him, as is the developer, Mr. Joey Smith. Be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
Okay, we'll hold a public hearing. Before we open public hearings, if you're wishing to speak for or against a certain topic, if you'll come to the podium, if you'll state your name and address. If you have any questions, if you'll direct those all to the council, we'll get those answered at the end of the public hearing. If you're speaking on behalf of yourself, you'll have 3 minutes. If you're speaking on behalf of a group, you'll have 5 minutes. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this PRD amendment, please come to the podium. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and we'll consider for passage on first reading ordinance 18OZ10 to amend approximately 28.18 acres in the Planned Residential Development PRD District located along Veterans Parkway and St. Andrews Drive, Kimbrough Woods PRD.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll, please.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll now consider Resolution 18RPH11 adopted by the City Council on February 15, 2018 to conduct a public hearing to consider a proposed amendment to rezone approximately 5.9 acres from single-family residential 10 RS10 district to College and University CU district, approximately 1.4 acres from local commercial district to College and University CU district located along City View Drive. MTSU Campus Planning is the applicant's. Notice of the said public hearing was published in the March 6, 2018 issue of a local newspaper. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. The subject property is located along the west side of City View Drive. All the properties on the map before you in both orange and blue, my two favorite colors, are owned by MTSU. There are a total of 10 parcels. The properties are developed with a handful of residences as well as a couple of parking lots as well. MTSU has purchased these parcels over the years, and what brings this request before you today is their desire to build a new transportation building, a new facility which would house their transportation offices as well as a bus maintenance building as well. Just to kind of orient you a little bit, there's an existing parking lot here at the corner of Alumni and City View Drive, and an existing parking lot here that is on the corner of East Main Street and City View Drive, kind of wrapping around the tavern right there on the corner. The intramural fields are right there. The CU zoning district would allow the proposed facility that the university would like to construct on the property. They came to us and said that they were contemplating this facility and what zoning would they need. We told them that CU would be the appropriate zone for that particular use, and we also told them that because they owned basically the whole west side of that block, that it made sense for them to go ahead and include all of the parcels that they owned in this request, because in case they came to the city in the future with the desire to build future buildings, we wouldn't have to come back before the council and study the rezoning of that property. So we are looking at the rezoning of all 10 of those parcels, 9 of which are zoned RS10 and 1 of which is zoned CL for the zoning of CU, Colleges and Universities District. With respect to the 2035 future land use plan, you'll see that the light blue area, which takes up basically in this drawing takes up the whole north side of East Main Street, is public institutional. And the public and institutional land use character area in the Murfreesboro 2035 comprehensive plan indicates that institutional land uses include improved parcels and facilities that are held in the public interest and are usually exempt from real property taxation, plus service drives or roads inside the actual parcel. The category encompasses major city-owned facilities, plus other public and private buildings and sites with an institutional nature. And it mentions that appropriate development types include schools, colleges, and universities. So no doubt the 2035 plan was recognizing the need of the university to have a place for future expansion and recommending that this area be developed as public and institutional. The Planning Commission conducted a public hearing on this request on February the 7th and unanimously recommended approval. We'll need to conduct a public hearing tonight. I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing. Now, if it pleases the mayor and council, I'd like to invite Mr. Bill Waits to the podium. Mr. Waits is the interim assistant vice president of campus planning for MTSU. He took over for Ms. Patty Miller when Ms. Miller left for another position. And so Mr. Waits has a few words to say about the proposed facility which brought forth this rezoning.
Good evening. I'm Bill Waits with MTSU Campus Planning. As Matthew mentioned, we were using the north half of this rezoned property for our parking and transportation facility. Just a brief kind of synopsis of the program of this facility. It's a 12,500 square foot building that will have several uses. Most of the building will be office space for the parking and transportation department. We'll have a small transaction area that will be used by students and guests of the university to conduct business, such as acquire parking passes. We will also have a 3-bay enclosed bus service area. The existing parking lot to the north we plan to utilize as a parking area, off-hours parking area for the MTSU shuttle buses. This site was identified in our 2016 campus master plan for this usage. And I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have regarding this facility or our zoning application.
Any questions for Mr. Waits?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, we'll need to open the public hearing for this rezoning request. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to the podium. All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll consider for passage on first reading ordinance 18OZ11 to rezone an area along City View Drive to College and University CU District.
Craig, I need to disclose that I'm an MTSU employee on this particular vote. However, I don't see it as any conflict of interest in my opinion. So just for the record, is that okay if I just do that, and is that enough?
Yeah, I think a disclosure would be appropriate. There's no private interest that could accrue to you, so I think that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Pursuant to Resolution 18 RPH 12 adopted by the City Council on February 15, 2018, we'll conduct a public hearing to consider amending Murfreesboro City Code Appendix A zoning, Section 3 Plan Development Regulations, Section 19 Residential Districts, Section 21 Commercial Districts, Chart 1 Uses Permitted by Zoning District, Chart 1 End Notes Uses Permitted by Zoning District pertaining to multifamily housing. City of Murfreesboro is the Planning Department is the applicant. Notice of said public hearing was published in that March 6, 2018 issue of a local newspaper. Mr. Anthony, do you, before you get into, I know Mr. Blomley was talking about his favorite color is orange and blue. Do you know what the number 84 and 53 have in common? That was the final score of Clemson and Auburn this past week. So I think that's 31 points that they lost by. Mr. Blomley wanted to point that out. Mr. Anthony, proceed.
It's always fitting to point that out. Thank you and good evening. As you know, the City Council enacted a moratorium on rezonings on the RM12 and RM16 zoning districts about a year and a half ago. Since the enactment of that moratorium, new requests for multifamily residential projects have only been allowed to move forward using planned development zoning. The PUD and PRD districts allow the Planning Commission and City Council to exercise considerable discretion when it comes to site layout, design, and other important factors. This zoning ordinance amendment would codify the requirement that multifamily residential be allowed only in planned developments. There would only be two exceptions to that. First, if the property is zoned CU, multifamily residential would still be a by right use. All CU parcels except for one are owned by the state of Tennessee and are located in or around the MTSU campus. Second, if a property was zoned RM12, RM16, MU, or CBD on or prior to December 31st, 2017, then that property would retain multifamily residential as a by right use. A new clause indicating that would be placed in sections 19 and 21 of the zoning ordinance, and a new endnote would be added to Chart 1. Besides addressing multifamily residential uses, this amendment has two other minor parts. One, it adds introductory language to the Chart 1 endnotes. This language was previously shown in the ordinance but was unintentionally eliminated from the ordinance during a revision that was approved last year. Two, all references to RM22 would be removed from the zoning ordinance. RM22 is a defunct zoning district. It was removed from the ordinance last year, and there are still some remnant references to it in the ordinance. The Planning Commission held a public hearing for this item on February 7th. There were no speakers for or against the amendment, and the Planning Commission voted unanimously to send this forward to you with a favorable recommendation. Staff can answer any questions before or after the public hearing. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Anthony? All right, seeing none, we'll open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to the podium. All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll consider for passage on first reading ordinance 18012, amending Murfreesboro City Code Appendix A zoning, Section 13 Plan Development Regulations, Section 19 Residential Districts, Section 21 Commercial Districts, Chart 1 and Chart 1 endnotes, uses permitted by zoning district pertaining to multifamily housing.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll now consider recommendations of the Parks and Recreation Director, change order number 4 to ESG contract for the Adams Tennis Center lights. You also have some supplemental information that's on your desk in front of you.
Good evening. In 2016, the Murfreesboro City Council approved a contract with Energy Systems Group, or ESG, for energy conservation and renovation projects. The contract included improvements at the Fire Administration and Water Resources Engineering buildings in the amount of $955,000. However, project revisions resulted in cost savings of approximately $310,000. A change order to the contract scope of work is requested to retrofit interior lighting at the Adams Tennis Complex. The goals of this project include energy savings and cost savings through conversion to high-efficient LED lighting and to increase the lighting levels of the tennis court to NCAA competition levels of approximately 75-foot candles. Current light levels in the courts are as low as 40-foot candles. ESG estimates payback on the tennis center lighting at just over 15 years, which is extremely favorable considering the dramatic increase to the lighting levels. The cost for the work is $210,531 and will be covered in its entirety from the owner-controlled contingency assigned to that project. As such, no additional funding is needed at this time. I'm seeking your approval of the change order to the contract scope of work, and I welcome any questions.
Mayor and Council, we wanted to point out in the supplemental information that we do not consider these contingencies lightly. We felt like all the contingencies needed to come back before Council and be approved before change orders were put in place. Even though this is a no-cost change order to the contract, there were other uses that you could have contemplated for that $310,000 contingency saved from removing part of the more complex items that were into the renovation of the old City Hall, now Water Sewer Engineering and Fire Administration. We believe we've been upfront and shown these to you, and we would still recommend to you that relighting of Adams Tennis Center would have been a top priority for us. The lighting has been an issue in the play in the center since day number one, and not only do we hope that this saves us energy costs over time, saves lots of maintenance bills, but we also believe it will improve the playability for the very active members at the tennis center.
I found one of the real positives in this to be the fact that it does have a payback in 15 years, that it actually wouldn't have the expense. I mean, it does have a return. That makes it a little more comfortable. If there's no questions or comments, I move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. You also have another item for Apex Mover Plus Storage to physically move the Murfreesboro Police Department from its current locations to 1004 Highland Avenue.
Mayor, we're glad to cover that now or other business. The physical moving of the files, the fixtures, some equipment from the various locations of police now to Highland Avenues. This is the contract that physically accomplishes that. It is at the same rates and same terms as this company performed the moving services for Rutherford County's new judicial center. We'd recommend approval of this contract with Apex Moving for a not-to-exceed price of $55,500.
Have they given us a price?
Yes, the contract is attached to the back of your memo, and it's a hourly rate with an estimate of costs. Then they applied a contingency to it to arrive at a guaranteed not to exceed contract number.
Does this include getting the evidence and everything moved over, or is that going to be on a different?
This is in the entirety of the move for all of the police department's locations.
If there are no questions or comments, I move for approval.
Second.
Motion and second.
I stand corrected on one item. The material and evidence that has to remain in custody will be moved in a different process than this one. Apex would not be involved in moving the evidence.
Okay, good.
That's required in
I had a little
custody.
concern with that, but if that's the case, good.
There's a company that specializes in that will be submitting on that. I believe this is piggybacking off of and using the same terms and conditions as Jim said for the Judicial Center, and they also have forensic concerns with their move, and so they have a company that will do the same process with.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, you have a motion and a second.
So moved.
I think
We
already
had that, we just need to vote.
Yeah. Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll now consider recommendations of the Human Resources Director, Fit for Success Program, Murfreesboro Parks and Recreation. Ms. Russell.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. This evening I have three separate agenda items, each requiring a vote. The first item is a request to extend Fit for Success program to retirees, part-time, and seasonal employees. Fit for Success program is an employee wellness program designed to address individual fitness needs of our full-time employees and their eligible dependents. Currently, full-time employees and dependents that enroll in the program are provided a premium pass valued at $315 annually for individual and $450 annually for families at no cost to the employee other than related payroll taxes. It's being recommended that the City of Murfreesboro retirees and spouses and long-term disabled be eligible to participate in Fit for Success. It's also being recommended that part-time and seasonal employees be eligible to participate, employee only, in Fit for Success. Since most of the part-time employees work at the Parks and Recreation facility, it would be nice for them to be able to enjoy the amenities offered there. Because this group has an irregular schedule for part-time and seasonal, taxes would be paid at a one-time annual basis. The financial impact is minimal for the city. The benefit is taxable to retirees, and it may be reported on a 1099 miscellaneous. The interim city manager, finance, parks and recreation, and human resources recommend this change. And so it's being recommended that City Council approve retirees, their spouses, long-term disabled to participate in Fit for Success in addition to part-time and seasonal employees.
Okay, any questions about this recommendation?
I think it's a good program.
Yeah.
And I agree. If there are no questions or comments, I move for approval.
Yeah, I agree with Madeline, and thank you especially for including the retirees, because I know that they're on fixed incomes, and I think it's a true benefit to them as well. So I second the motion.
Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll now talk about revision to the Employee Handbook, Section 1004, Family and Medical Leave. Ms. Russell.
Much of the policy reflects federal guidelines and requirements as it relates to employer rights to protected leave. The policy also includes additional city requirements for employees to meet. And based on feedback from employees and management, we've removed the manager's requirement of notifying Human Resources if an employee is absent more than 3 days on paid leave, specifically if they are not aware of any potential FMLA situation. The flexibility in no way violates federal guidelines, but offers employees and managers some flexibility in the employee absence program. And I think we had the policy this way years back, and so we're just putting that change back in. There is no financial impact on the policy change. The interim city manager, legal, and human resources recommend the change. So it's being recommended that City Council approve revised employee handbook, section 1004. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions?
If not, so moved.
A second.
Motion and a second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll now consider revision of the Employee Handbook, Section 4007, Workers' Compensation. Ms. Russell.
The Employee Handbook, Section 4007, Workers' Compensation, is outdated. The current policy does not reflect the city's agreement with a third-party administrator for workers' compensation program. So the policy has been updated to reflect the administrative changes due to this agreement. The policy language has also been updated to read more user-friendly and to better clarify the benefit. There is no financial impact on the policy change, and the interim city manager, legal, and human resources recommend this change. It is therefore recommended that City Council approve changes to Policy 4007 entitled Workers' Compensation.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. Ms. Wright.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. We'll now consider recommendations of the Assistant City Attorney for the contract for purchase and sale of real property located between Florence Road and CSX right-of-way.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Back in 2004, where the city acquired property out off of Florence Road that is now the Public Works Facility and the Fleet Maintenance Facility. At that time, we also acquired a remnant parcel that's bounded by the CSX Railroad right-of-way and the new right-of-way of Florence Road and the old right-of-way of Florence Road. Well before the city acquired this property, the state had revised the intersection of Florence Road and Northwest Broad to make it a T intersection as opposed to a skewed intersection that it had been for years. By rerouting Florence Road to accommodate that new intersection, this remnant was created. A little over a year ago, we received an expression of interest in the property, and Council and Planning Commission elected to have Gateway Commission conduct a public forum, a public notification to to solicit interest in the property. We published an ad in local newspaper. We received two bids, one substantially higher than the other one, and the higher bid was for $101,150. That bid came in, I believe, October of 2017, or actually 2016. That bidder asked for a delayed closing, and staff agreed to accommodate that. And so we're here. He is now prepared to go forward with this, and we're recommending to Council that we accept this a contract to sell this property, this remnant parcel, in the amount of $101,150. The impact to the city is that we will receive a little over $100,000 at closing. There will be some nominal closing costs. We're not providing a title policy for this remnant, and so the closing costs will be minimal, but there will be a few dollars. Recommend to approve the contract and authorize the mayor to sign. Be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Ives, for the sake of full disclosure, would you please mention the name of who the high bidder is?
The high bidder is Chris Bratcher. Chris, as many of us know, was a council member for many years here in the city, served as vice mayor for many years, and he was the one who expressed the interest, and it was because of his relationship with the city that staff recommended and everyone agreed, and we did the public auction process rather than simply, I think the offer was a good one when he first made it, but to make it clear that we were not self-dealing with a former councilman, we did the public process. The two bids did come in, and his was by far the highest bid.
Yeah, I agree. He has every right to bid just like anybody else would, and certainly, but I just didn't want it to not be mentioned. Thank you.
I understand. Thank you.
Were any council members or anyone involved in this transaction?
Other than council approving that we go this direction, but to my knowledge, other than approving that we have an auction, essentially an auction, sealed bid type auction, no other involvement that I'm aware of. I don't think there was.
I just want to make sure that it was clear to the public that we are not involved in soliciting bids for these types of properties. That's handled by staff. So.
Correct.
Any questions?
All that said, I move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We have several beer permits tonight. Ms. Wright, thank you, Mr. Ives.
We do. We have a ownership change for a grocery market at 760 East Northfield Boulevard. That application is in order with the exception of finalizing their building codes inspections. Again, we have another restaurant at 2021 South Church Street that is also an ownership change and a name change. They also lack their building codes inspections, but otherwise their application is in order. We have a restaurant at 352 West Northfield, Suite 4F. It is an ownership change and a name change. That application is in order with the exception of finalizing their building codes inspections. And finally, we have a grocery market at 1622 Braidable Pike. Ownership name change again. That application is also in order with the exception of completing their building codes inspections. We would wait for those inspections to be finalized before we would issue the permit should you approve it tonight. And I'll be glad to try to answer any questions.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright?
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we have no board and commission appointments. Any statements, Ms. Wright?
No, sir.
Okay. You do have a couple of items for other business. Mr. Crumley has given us information regarding Fire Station 4 for owner's representation. Mr. Crumley?
Council, as you know, we have moved forward in the process of using owner's reps on both the Doug Young Public Safety Training Facility and on the new prototype fire station 11, to be constructed at the corner of Blaze and Fortress Boulevards. We were a little hesitant to make the same recommendation to you about Fire Station 4, feeling that the circumstances there didn't have quite the same risk profile as the other projects. If you remember, Station 4 was awarded to bid in the middle of December. A significant amount of work was required to remove the landfill material below that building and replace it with stone. To date, we're probably just over $1 million into that roughly $6 million total project. We did seek a proposal from one of the firms we're using as owner's representatives to be owner's rep on the Station 4 project. We felt that the fee for that service was potentially a little out of line with the risks remaining in the construction of Station 4. Obviously, the biggest risk at Station 4 was the foundations, and that's completed. Station 4 is not the same complexity in terms of the building as what you've seen at Doug Young Public Safety Training Center, or the review we think necessary for the prototype Fire Station 11 that, if successful, will get repeated over and over in the community. The majority of this building's square feet are engine bays, basically a large metal shell without a number of complex mechanical systems in it. And as such, we wanted to put back in front of you for discussion purposes tonight whether or not you feel owner's representation is needed on the Station 4 project. And if so, if you would like for us, it's very difficult to go back and negotiate these prices. What we've got is an hourly rate with a not to exceed number. With so much of the Station 4 project already behind us in terms of the dollar value, we feel like we could ask them to lower the not to exceed cap, but the hourly rates would remain the same in the owner's representation. we're seeking guidance and seeking opinions on how you would like us to proceed here. Station 4 is on budget. The additional costs of removing material below the building and replacing it with compacted stone has used 100% of the contingency. There is no additional contingency left in the Station 4 bids, but we are on budget as of today.
So is this hourly rate the same rate that they billed us for the police?
It is.
Okay. And I think I missed last week because my son had a golf match. But I think one of the things that we have said as a council, we do want owner's rep on everything that as we move forward. And I'm very much a proponent of using our owner's rep. Maybe instead of doing a yearly rate, why don't we just do it monthly?
Well, I think the problem here is the cap. It's not the hourly rates.
Yeah.
It is the not to exceed number. I'd like to speak with them a little more about the lowering of that not to exceed figure. I think 12 months is more than adequate. This is a 12-month proposal. That's more than adequate to complete the fire station. We're realistically 8 months to completion on that building.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Steel's been ordered.
Yeah.
Mechanical equipment's been ordered. The risk profile of this project's a little different.
Well, I think, I think when you look at the report that Johnson Bailey gave us on our past 3 or 4 fire halls that we had built, where we had some roof issues and some things that had not gotten mitigated. Luckily, we had held money out to be able to get those things. And I don't want to sound like a broken record, but, I think we have to significantly change the way that we're handling construction projects, because the way that we have handled them in the past, I think we have had some success in some areas, but we definitely have seen room for improvement. When you take it where you're asking staff, we have architects, and I know the architects are going to look at those different things, but as someone who deals with architects on a daily basis, architects mess up too, and we need to have someone that is also monitoring the architect. So in my opinion, I think although it is an expense, when you look at punch list review, true up, final doc reviews, test and balance, final reviews, which is for your heating and cooling, a final operational review, 30, 60, 90 year and 1 year inspections, I mean, those things are invaluable for us making sure that we get a product that is what's supposed to happen. And then I think the other thing for finance and administration, I think it's beneficial to have someone looking at an extra set of eyes looking at pay apps, to do cash forecasting, to look at all the things that are going to be coming up. So, unless we see something that changes, and this is after talking with the county on how well that the judicial building has gone, having that owner's rep on an $80 million project. I think until we see that something changes, I agree with Councilman Wade. What do you need from us, Jim?
I think I've heard everything I need. I will try to get them to reduce the not to exceed number to more accurately reflect what's left in the construction process. But I think we've got good instructions to move forward.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Are we in other business yet?
Well, and Ms. Wright, we've got the bonds previously issued with the remaining balance. Is this for information, or is this something that you?
It's as much for information as anything else. Mr. Crumley called today and said this might be a good time to give you an idea of what we do in finance to track our money for the bond issues. And my staff member, Vicki Massey, keeps up with that, with each expense that we write a check for by bond issue, to get a better handle of what we have left and what we're going to need in the next issue. So I've put this together. Not sure if it's something you would like to get regularly, if it's helpful, but give you a chance to look at it, and then you can get back with us and let us know if it's something you think is useful to you.
No, I mean, I think
going back to the issues we had primarily with police headquarters and cost, This is a starting point. This is something that we produce every month for our internal use. It's a starting point for something to offer you a report on in terms of keeping track of and knowing where our major capital projects stand. This particular document has limitations. It is only the money that we flow through the bonds that we have sold. There are other sources of revenue that go into some of these projects, grants from Christie Houston and other foundations. There are other sources of income that don't flow through that report. But we thought that's a good place to start in terms of give us back your suggestions, what you would like to see, and we'll try to take the good information that we're already producing and incorporate that into a document that's beneficial to you.
Ms. Wright, I think this is valuable information. The one thing I would, from my standpoint, what we're looking at is more of, in the way I see it, more balance sheet items, that this is what our liability that we borrowed for a certain project and how we accumulate, how we categorize that. For example, the first T program, the 107.5 that we budgeted in 2012 with our TML bond, I assume that some of that money is now being spent on
Which line are you referring to, Mayor?
Golf course, first T program under golf.
Our process is the first dollar spent are the monies we've been given.
Right.
In this case, Christie Houston funded that project. We haven't tapped the city's money yet, but that project will use that $107,000.
We always use grant money first.
Right. And I guess where I am, I think these numbers are phenomenal, but I would not want, as we're using these, there's a big difference between a balance sheet and a job cost. So, we've got that 107.5 that we've got budgeted on our balance sheet that we have outlined out there. But if we have 107.5 and our job cost comes in at 125, there's an $18,000 difference that is going to be cash that we're having to take from somewhere else. So trying to make sure that we're keeping our job costing on a project, I don't want us using, this is just my opinion when I say I don't think we can use our funding as our budgeting. That's a bad way to handle things. So if we can make sure that our job costing and our debt that we're borrowing are treated separately. Yeah,
they are different things, and that's not what this was intended to be. For example, these have our match for our road projects, but the federal money flows through a different fund.
Sure.
This is just giving an accounting for the bond money.
That's perfect. And we've talked about it at our workshops and our retreats. We've really talked about two separate things. We've talked about, putting in home ownership terms. We've talked about what the line of credit, the home equity line of credit is, and then we've talked about what the project cost is. And when there's a difference between that project cost and what your line is, that money's got to come from somewhere. So that's really, I think, as a council, really what we're wanting to see is to make sure that those budgets and what we've aligned are there. This is great, though.
It's a good beginning. We'll work on it to make it better.
Mr. Crumley, do you want to share? I think Councilman Wade has something, but do you want to share? I think we've got our bond issuance came on, was it Tuesday?
Had 10 bids, which is extremely competitive for the city's general obligation bonds. The low bidder was Morgan Stanley and Raymond James in conjunction with each other, 2.78% for the 15 years fixed. They were bid to the city as premium bonds, which means where we offered $71 million in bonds, they actually will pay us a little over $75.8 million. So we've started the process. Melissa and I are working on what do you bring forward from your 2019 bond list to incorporate with this additional money that we've taken in from this sale on Tuesday. We'll work on that and have a list of projects that we'd recommend to you, moving from the 2019 unissued bonds to cover the premium paid on these 2018 bonds.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for your hard work on that. Councilman Wade?
Yep. What's the status and update on the city manager's job?
Job postings all went out on Tuesday of this week. The job was posted on about 45 different locations, ranging from state city manager associations over a broad part of the United States to the ICMA newspaper, to the TML newspaper. There will be ads in local papers here. It's up on our website as of today. So the start to the process has begun. April 19th is the cutoff for application on those ads. After that point in time, SGR will begin the process of evaluating the applicants and trying to consolidate them into meaningful groups for you all to look at.
Okay. As we continue this process, I'd like to see Mr. Tyndall and Ms. Russell involved in this process as well.
Glad to.
Thank you.
I would agree. I think you want to hear from more than, but I want to appreciate the hard work that staff has put into this. But at the end of the day, I think the council hires the city manager, and we have checks and balances. There's only 3 or 4 people that we actually hire, so I think it's beneficial to make sure that any correspondence or anything that comes from those consultants that the council is included in that.
We'll forward all the information.
All right.
Good.
Any other business?
Good with that.
I'm good.
So we'll make sure moving forward, Mr. Tyndall, Ms. Russell, I think we've got a track record. This is the way we handled the city attorney, that HR was the professionals in that. So I think Ms. Russell, honestly, if the council's okay, I think Ms. Russell with HR would be great to be a point of contact with the consultants to make sure that this process is moving along expeditiously.
Yeah.
I mean, we need someone in place. Is that?
You're good?
Yeah.
We're good.
Okay. All right. Any other business? All right. We'll stand adjourned.